Welcome to the internet. Welcome to the internet.
Willkommen im Cave Space One. Willkommen in der Höhle des Einsiedlers.
You know, Julian's situation right now is extremely perilous. He's in Belmarsh prison facing extradition to the United States, where, depending on how you count it, it's somewhere between 10 and 175 years. But in reality, it's not even clear that he'll live long enough to serve out his jail sentence. He's had a stroke in prison. He's lived in conditions that the United Nations consider to be tantamount to torture. So it's arbitrary detention and torture for him, and his conditions are just atrocious, and his future is bleak. And the British have essentially agreed to extradite him, although originally they agreed not to extradite him because they thought he would commit suicide. However, it's not clear to me what will happen next, and the court cases are still going through the High and the Supreme Court in the UK, and eventually to the European Court of Human Rights. So, I mean, if we go back to the original idea of WikiLeaks, the idea is that the method is transparency and the goal is justice. And in the work that I did with WikiLeaks, it was to try to reveal war crimes. This is my interest. I felt like the Afghan and the Iraq War were both atrocious human rights disasters, the Iraq War especially. And showing, for example, with the collateral murder video, US soldiers gunning down journalists working at Reuters kind of shows the double standard in play. And the Pentagon's response was that WikiLeaks had blood on their hands. And it's kind of a funny commentary from the Pentagon. You reveal that their soldiers killed people, and by doing that revelation, they say, you have blood on your hands. Which is like, well, yeah, it must have been on the videotape your soldiers you passed along, you know, like from the killing of the civilians that were done. And so how can we resist this? Well, I think Julian and I have talked about this a lot. Julian and Sarah Harrison and I gave a speech at the Chaos Computer Club many years ago where we said the right thing to do is basically like the 68ers marched through the institutions. By going into the institutions and being part of those institutions and getting evidence from inside the institution, you can prove to the public what has occurred. Snowden did, at least in direct defiance of a lot of propaganda, is that people in the US government would say, oh, that's not real, that didn't happen. and then he would pull out a document written by the exact person that disputed that, and a journalist would publish it, and it would be clear that in fact they had ordered exactly that thing to occur, and it was them that had done it. So their public statements as government officials were official lies, and then the documents prove that. So being able to get the original source documents allows for kind of settling the discussion. Because the observation from Julian is that when two government officials talk to each other, they create some official correspondence that tells the internal narrative. And then the external narrative is something completely different. It's some kind of propaganda, or it's some kind of specific goal that's being achieved. Like you want people to believe the State Department is all about human rights, but it's actually also soft power. And sometimes that soft power is doing things that don't actually support human rights. And so the internal discussion might be horse trading about some human rights issues, but the external discussion is something else. So the internal documents actually set the record straight about what the propaganda says, and what it is actually true and what's not true. And it doesn't always do this, but it often does this. So by going into those institutions, by people joining those institutions, and then being sources and leaking that, they might destroy their own lives, right? If you look at the lives of someone like Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden, you see that a whistleblower's life is almost no life at all. And it's very difficult. And if you look at what happens to publishers, like Julian, who is, by the way, not a whistleblower, but a publisher, you see that it's also not easier for publishers.
But when you're saying institutions, what would you say are the most urgent institutions? Is it in Europe? Is it the European Parliament? Are these companies which are dealing with the security architecture that is determining our life? So what are the institutions where I would say we really need the people who are cooperating with people who are dealing with the idea of free, total transparency?
Well, I think total transparency is a dream, right? We'll never reach that. And actually the surveillance state tries to get us to operate in a model of total transparency. So WikiLeaks also had this idea that we should have privacy for the weak and transparency for the strong. And I tend to agree with that. And so where do we need the most whistleblowing? Probably in the organizations that have the least democratic oversight and the least transparency. The fact that ZDF and Fragdenstadt received these whistleblowing documents from inside of the Verfassungsschutz about the Nazi NSU scandal, that tells you what one person can do. One person, I assume, but it could be 10 or 20, we don't know, but at least one person has leaked these documents that describe the internal discourse of the Verfassungsschutz about these murders of Turkish people in Germany, and about the Nazi organization around it, and the state support of those Nazi murderers. So one person doing that in a secret service can change the entire public discourse. It can change what facts are available in public, which can change the entire propaganda apparatus's response. So it seems like the right way to look at it is to decide what you individually want to do. That's actually what matters, because everybody can play a different part. And it's not clear what part is best. And I wouldn't want to say to, this gentleman in the front that you should go get a job at the Verfassungsschutz. But when Sarah and I gave this talk with Julian at the Chaos Computer Club, our take was, go get a job at the CIA. Go get a job at the NSA. And when you see something, as the US government likes to say something, right? The idea being, if you can blow the whistle, then do that. But that's a very tall order, right? It's easy to say and hard to do. Everybody that has done this has been wrecked by the state if they get caught. The only people that haven't been wrecked are the ones that are successful at their operational security plan to stay completely anonymous. For example, almost all the whistleblowers that went to The Intercept were arrested later because The Intercept are completely incompetent in operational security. So they had, I think, 4 sources that went to prison or something like that. It's crazy. Right? Der Spiegel, by comparison, when I was working with them, we didn't have any sources that went to prison because we took the information security very seriously. So, I mean, it's a lot to ask to become a whistleblower, or even to be part of publishing. It's a lot to ask because the state will react.
Komm, Trost der Welt, du stille Nacht, steigst du von den Bergen sacht, die Lüfte alle schlafen, ein Schiffer nur noch
is critical. It's an important goal that they have, and implied in that is a lot of surveillance capitalism. There's a good book about this called Surveillance Capitalism, and it discusses the economics of the situation. And I mean, it's important to note that, you know, Google is problematic, but Google also provides things that are useful for people, right? And that's why it's so deceptively powerful, is that you want to look for something and it's easy to go to Google and search for something, and then from that it solves the need you have, and then the side effect is that you've given them information about yourself, maybe your location, maybe other details like what your pattern of life is. And this contributes to a world of building profiles of people. And this pattern of life collection is actually one of the goals of many intelligence agencies. Identification of traffic flows or of behaviors, and then tying that to individuals, and with pattern of life collection, that allows you to really build like an agent-based simulation of basically humanity, if you want to. And I mean, this is problematic because in the past, this was really the realm of intelligence services, and it was not done very efficiently. Like if you look at early Stasi work on social networks, you see these like hand-drawn social graphs of a couple dozen subversives. And I mean, it's comparatively, it's nothing, right? And you could hear a lot of pearl clutching about the Stasi's surveillance, right? And there's reasons for it, because what they could do with that was really powerful, just with very small amounts of information. So I think we shouldn't just focus on Google, though, right? I mean, IBM wants to build so-called smart cities, but the first smart cities that were ever built by IBM were in Europe. They used the Deutsche Hollerith punch card machine to do census, and with that they were able to schedule deportations and property seizures and actually execute the Holocaust, which is what IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black discusses at length, and I cite that in the book. That's just with a few bits of information. And what Google has is more in the realm of, let's say, megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes of information on a person, depending on how much data you store with them and what they've gathered. And so the question is, in my mind, whether or not states can regulate these corporate bodies, or whether states will simply team up with these corporate bodies and to use that data. And so what Google was doing at this conference I mentioned was that they were basically offering their services to states. So instead of being regulated by the state, they would work together with the state. And then the state would, of course, not limit them, and then that would increase their market potential. And thus, you would have a nice marriage of corporations in the state. You've probably heard of political ideologies that marry corporations in the state, and they're a little bit scary. So I think that that's not unique to Google, right? IBM is, in my opinion, much worse than Google when they want to build these modern smart cities, which are essentially the same as what Google is doing, but instead of a device you carry with you, it's the entire city around you and a device. But we're fast approaching a world where you have surveillance as the default for everything. I mean, in America, you have a credit report. In China, you have the social credit score. And in Germany, a much weaker system exists, the Schufa system. I'm sure all of you have experienced not getting an apartment or something because of Schufa. I recently just had that problem, and it was a fucking lie. Like, my Schufa file had mistakes in it. And luckily, I was able to correct it, but too bad for me, I lost the opportunity that I needed the Schufa for. So I got super fucked by this very tiny version of a credit score or a social credit score. And that ties in with all the other data sources, because what Schufa does is they get as much data as they're legally allowed to. So these things are kind of converging all around the world, and so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we want? And Europe does have very good democratic institutions, so I think what Europeans can do here is try to ensure that if these systems do exist, they're under democratic control rather than solely corporate control or intelligence services.
Ich bin Konrad Bayer. Ich bin Konrad Bayer. Ich bin Konrad.
Courage is contagious. You wrote on the backside of your book. Here it's an artificial cave. We use the cave and the isolation and the network connected with this as a model, just to introduce some certain thoughts and to connect with other artists everywhere in the world. But the price for the real whistleblowers, and you named today Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning, the price is very high. And also in your case already, the price is very high, that you are not locked like Snowden in Moscow, or who was not like Assange in Belmarsh. But the price is actually also to become a hermit and to get totally isolated. Yeah. Assange is sitting now, I think, 13 years in isolation. Yeah, first he was arrested, where he could not leave his house. Then there was a period in the embassy, and now he's in Belmarsh already for 3 years. So, and this is a real hermit life, which is provoked by the politics, actually.
Sure. I mean, I haven't been to my home country of America in almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years next May, because I was working on the Snowden affair, and I had been working on WikiLeaks things, and you know, I got threatened enough that I recognized that it was not a safe place for me to be, and I've been here since. I haven't entered an embassy or a consulate in that time period, really, except in the very beginning. But some of the repression is just them letting you know that they're watching and they're around. And some of it is, for example, I'm named in the indictment with Julian. So the indictment has 19 counts against Julian, 17 of which are about publications. And in that indictment, I'm listed as WikiLeaks associate number 3. And I was like, oh, I'm not even number 1. What a fucking insult. You know, I have to be number 3. Oh, oy vey. But, but in that document, they're very clear that public political talks I gave at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and the Chaos Computer Club, that those are in the set of the setting for the indictment. Right? So they're saying public political talks at a German Stiftung are the context of criminality, which is pretty fucking wild if you think about it. Like, as a journalist, talking about the need for more sources, talking about the need for whistleblowers, that they're criminalizing investigative journalism, including the development of sources who tell us how the world really works. They're really drawing a stark line. And so I've lived here for, you know, as I said, like 10 years basically in exile, which is a kind of a cave in a sense, right? I'm very disconnected from the US. My family in America has had some trouble. My mom, for example, was interrogated about my role in WikiLeaks, which is pretty crazy. And the back of the book quotes Dan Ellsberg and saying courage is contagious. The thing is, cowardice is also contagious, right? So that's why it's important to do the right thing, or what you think is the right thing, or try to do that. Not because you think you can win, but because it is, in fact, in itself the right thing to do. And like living in Germany, the land of Immanuel Kant, has really changed my mind about this a lot, right? I always ask myself, what if everybody did that? Or, you know, thinking about the categorical imperative. And I think it's important that we actually try to do the right thing. And it's tricky to know what that is. And it can actually, you can be tricked and do the wrong thing thinking you did the right thing. But in this case, informing the public, I think, is the right thing, because in democracies, that allows us to shape our societies. So knowing, for example, that X-Keyscore, the mass surveillance system of the NSA, is deployed for Berlin. What you do on the internet in Berlin is captured by this NSA mass surveillance program. And the Bundesverfassungsschutz and the Bundesnachrichtendienst, they actually have access to this system. Knowing that means definitely don't buy your drugs on the internet, Berliners, right? Like, just in a very simple sense. Not that I'm advocating that you buy drugs. Obviously, you should get them for free. But I'm a big fan of socialized medicine. But I think that the thing is that mass surveillance program, it's in the public interest to know about it. Will that bring me into trouble to talk about it? Maybe, possibly. But I don't want other people to be in trouble because of this overarching system, where governments for many years have actually convinced people that it's a paranoid delusion that the government listens to things. But it really... on the internet and then put it into databases, which are then used by analysts when they want to do some kind of analysis to look up a particular person's history or life. And that changes things. Imagine you're a politician and these systems exist. How can that data be used to corrupt your democracy? The answer is very easily. So if people know about it, they can change that and hopefully keep their democracy.
But This is not only the country of Immanuel Kant, but also of Karl Marx. And Karl Marx said that the production tools should be in the hand of the people and of the citizens. But at the moment, all the communication tools are not in the hand of the people, not even in the hand of the state, but from some global and private companies. I remember it from another talk with you that they demanded, for instance, that there should be, at least in Europe, a system where also a kind of hardware is produced, for instance, from the European Union, like a smartphone, which allows the people to control each part of the device by themselves, and where's the transparency of the technique and of the tool. So could this be something, or isn't this an urgent aim also, and an urgent target, that the communication tools are somehow not centralized by some big companies?
Yeah, I'm not a solutions kind of guy, if I'm honest about it, because I think that solutions are ultimately quite political, not technical. The technical solutions are inherently political, but they don't exist in a vacuum. Like if it becomes illegal to possess a device where you can control it yourself, obviously the device is a danger to you rather than a solution. So the political solutions are very important, maybe more important, but the technology also is relevant. So we need free software, as in free as in freedom, meaning that you have the freedom to study the software, the freedom to modify the software, the freedom to share the software, and the freedom to run it for any purpose. 4 freedoms of free software. And similarly, we need free and open hardware. And things like the 2020 Horizon grants from the EU, they fund the development of what we could consider as like a common infrastructure, so that normal people don't have to think about this, but the tools can be produced and be open and free and freely available. But right now, especially because of the information struggle that's happening with Russia and especially with China, what you see is that a lot of democratic institutions are sort of stepping back from that. They would rather have communication mediated by Facebook with moderators and AI tools than to actually double down on democracy. And I think that's dangerous, but it's not my choice alone to make, right? So I think these tools can be helpful, but they exist in a political context. And so what we need to do is engage with the political context first and foremost. And then ideally, money can be used to build tools that don't just enrich a small set of people, but that give everyone new capabilities, right? So each communication system we have becomes intermediated in some way. And what the internet presents us with is maybe a possibility to change that when we use encryption. But it's not clear that we'll actually get that. And a lot of the time we don't get that. So, I mean, I don't see a solution you can have right now, but you can apply lots of different strategies to, like, in some way try to help yourself. But there isn't a solution. I mean, you can try to spend cash. You can try not to use cell phones, try not to use the internet so much. But you're still having shadow profiles in most databases, or other people tag you in photos. So you're still going to have a data footprint. And if someone does become interested in you, this is a problem, I think, if the data being there is a problem. So you have to have like a multi-layered strategy. And even then, it's not clear that we can really protect ourselves long term. What Julian, I think at least for me, changed my mind was, as someone who had some technical skills, that we could use those technical skills to help benefit other people. In the thesis, I just tried to make it possible for you to protect like your own home network from targeted and mass surveillance. But it doesn't solve it for the whole internet. But at least if you're being targeted by like a creepy neighbor or the police or whoever, you can protect yourself enough that maybe they have to come with a legal instrument instead of doing it extra legally. And it won't protect you against the legal instrument, but it might force the use of a legal instrument, which is at least going to give you due process. And so I think that that's maybe not a satisfying answer, but I think that that's wise, that when you don't have a method of action to change the world, you end up minimizing it. It's, I think, called the gray rhinoceros, right? You have like a black swan event, and you have the gray rhinoceros. So right now we live in this era of the gray rhinoceros, where we see all of the data points. We all know the environment is fucking collapsing around us. We're all really, we have this Weltschmerz. At least I have this. I think everyone here has the Weltschmerz, right? I mean, who's wearing a t-shirt in this room right now at the end of October, right? And like that Weltschmerz is real. And I think that the gray rhinoceros is here, which is we all see it. We all see it coming. So the question is, what will be done with this data? How will it be used? And because we don't have a method of action to solve it. There isn't a singular solution. I think it's just easier to cope with it by accepting slowly but surely this change. But I remember a Berlin 15 years ago where you couldn't pay with a credit card anywhere. Nobody had a cell phone. If you were using computers, it was like weird even, unless you were part of the Chaos Computer Club, and then it was cool. That was okay because you were part of like a radical leftist organization for the liberation of humanity, right? And then it was okay. The technology was like an AK-47 in support of liberation. And now we see that it's like all cell phones all the time, cameras on the trains, credit cards everywhere, intermediated by corporations like PayPal, where they'll censor you and seize your funds without any due process. And I think that it's just hard to know what to do about that. But I think one thing is actually to try to build communities that don't need any of that stuff. And it's just really hard to do that when the communication mediums themselves are also corporate owned. Like you can't even have a mailing list these days that's hosted on your own infrastructure because almost everybody uses Gmail. And then if Gmail blocks your mailing list infrastructure, there goes your community. And so then people use Facebook instead. And now you're back in this fucking dystopian nightmare of AI surveillance and content moderation. So I think things like the theater are actually one of the ways that this changes, by having spaces where people meet, where there's real community. That's like, I think, the key. And I think that and democratic change, like contacting your elected representative, as completely boring and non-revolutionary as that sounds, actually might make a difference. And I think it probably does still here. And I think in other places, most of the governments of the world are not as democratic as Germany. I mean, it is possible for you to go to the Bundestag and talk to your representative about your concerns. So I think if the German government, for example, and the European Union are funding building alternatives to these corporate solutions, and they're helping to educate people and to make sure that there's equitable and equal access to these systems, I think that's a good direction. And I think Marx, when he talks about the means of control, we need to also ensure that people have the means of communication. They need to own the means of communication. So we need to have things like community mesh networks or internet exchange points that are free of surveillance, that are run by communities, so that we don't have to pay a corporation to send data across the city, for example. And that's still a dream.
Also the knowledge how Technic is working, and this was a process during the last 30 years. A programmer in the 80s was communicating on a very basic level with a computer. Yeah, but now it's a moment we have all these surfaces which brought us to the position not only of a user but also somehow of a baby who has no idea about procedures and the algorithms which are built in the phones or in the computers or in the softwares. We have not a clue about this, what is beyond the Technic. So this Marxist view also on Technic, or maybe from the Mises theory of Friedrich Kittler, that we should know how the Technic is working, we are very far away from this, and therefore also your book is such a big contribution to this point, that we get a better understanding also of the techniques.
I just wanted to ask you about how do you think face recognition will spoil even worse the whole story? Data, I mean the software itself.
I mean, what can you say? I mean, the spaces in which we're anonymous. Like, I'll give you an example. Who here has ever been to the Kit Kat Club? Like, can you imagine that place with facial recognition? That's a space that just would cease to exist with facial recognition, and no one in the room wants to admit to going there, so I'll do it. I've been there. It's a fantastic fucking club. It's don't use the pool, but still, the people that laughed have revealed that they've been there. They know about the pool. That'd be the scariest fucking pool in Europe, but so, yeah, clearly. But I mean, these spaces, they exist because there's anonymity. Right? So the more that we have things like facial recognition in public, I think the worse the world will get, frankly. I mean, there's two ways to look at it. When everybody's identified, then everyone knows what they do goes on to some kind of permanent record, and maybe they behave better. But the problem is that behaving better here is a weird unknown, right? Maybe they behave better in terms of loyalty to the state, but maybe they don't behave better in terms of loyalty to each other. right? Maybe, in fact, that's not what better actually means. So who controls the facial recognition system will be a fundamental question, and whether or not they're allowed will be another fundamental question. My hope is that in Germany, that facial recognition will simply just not be allowed in public spaces. And I hope that that's true in America, but I mean, I have very little hope for the United States, because the average American has far less democratic control than the average European. I mean, I think some people would argue with me about that, but I think they're wrong, and we could talk about why. But facial recognition is going to really glue your outdoor behavior to your digital records even more, and it'll be augmented with things like your cell phone in real time. There's some great videos from China where the Chinese facial recognition is like overlaid with not just the facial recognition of the individual, but also other data points. And the videos just show boxes flowing through cities, tracking people as they go. And who knows what will be done with that? But one example from America, which is obviously not China, is the automated license plate recognition system, where they track where your car goes. And that's, instead of facial recognition, it's just the license, the number shield, right? And being able to see where a car is. If a thief has access to that data set, they can know where your car is when you're somewhere else, and they can steal your car. If the state has access to that, maybe they can decide that you're a suspect in a crime, even though there's no other data point that would put you there. How often do these geographic warrants, for example, get issued to companies like Google, and what does that do to a person's life to be accused of that kind of thing? And do you have any right to even know that that happened? These will all tie together with facial recognition, and it will be all of these things all in one. The upside is that almost all the time the surveillance will become public, right?
You just mentioned that you're kind of tracked everywhere you go, so would it be able that there is some agent here tonight?
We are suspicious of each other. Maybe there is a rat tonight here.
Well, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency got up in his first lecture and he said that the top 3 priorities were Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and WikiLeaks. This is a multi-billion-dollar intelligence agency that does covert action. You know, they killed, with the Belgians, they killed Patrice Lumumba, right? These are not good guys. I mean, they may do good things sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I presume everywhere I go, because of my work with Julian, that I'm watched for the rest of my life. And sure, that could mean here in this room, but really the important thing to understand is that these are, as mere possibilities, chilling effects. And it's terrifying. So if there is a secret agent in the room whose job is to talk with the other people about my activities, feel free to come up to me, leak some documents to me. I'm super interested in hearing your perspective. I'm sure you think you're a good person. I'd love to hear about that, and I'd love to hear the internal dialogue. I'm married though, so no blowjobs. I'm sorry, can't give you any favors, you know. But we can give you free drinks, you know. But I think the thing is that just because these people probably are among us, I don't think we should let that chilling effect stop us from doing things to make the world a better place. The reality is, states express caring through surveillance often, which is an uncomfortable reality, right? Like financial surveillance in the form of tax. That's a kind of caring, where we care about each other through paying taxes, right? And that's a form of surveillance. So not all of the surveillance is necessarily towards a bad outcome or some shady secret conspiracy or something like that. But often when I travel, I get hilarious, obvious CIA people around me. I mean, they're like a fucking comedy, man. I mean, if they wanted to kill me, they could just do it, right? So I'm not really worried about that. I'm sure that the plan is a slow, painful, embarrassing death of irrelevance. So I'm not too scared or anything like that. But anyway, sources welcome. I love it when secret agents do that. Yeah, of course it changes you as a person. Like, let me tell you, before I was married, internet dating was probably really a great thing. I didn't do that. You know, like, you can't use these kinds of systems if you think you're a person of interest or target, right? There's lots of other simple things, but like, I try to not even cross the street when the light is red. You know, people in this neighborhood, they say Kindermord if you cross the street when the light is red, because you're setting a bad example. Like, imagine if everybody crossed the street when the light was red, right? So I don't even jaywalk. I'm like the most law-abiding person ever. I don't smoke weed. I don't even drink alcohol. I'm super fucking boring as a result. I'm like the most boring me I've ever been, because I have to internalize the fact that any mistake I make could end my ability to talk about this other stuff. So that's my sole focus, is to talk about that stuff. And it's a bit soul destroying, but it's also thrilling because I'm still alive and I'm still free, unlike many of my friends who are in prison. The term Zersetzung really speaks to me, and I met some people that were put under actual Stasi surveillance where they were targets of Zersetzung, and when speaking about their experience, I could really relate to a lot of it, and it is horrifying and terrible. But the right thing to do is to never give up, no matter what. We're all going to die. Nobody gets out of this life alive, so what are you going to do about it, right? Try to make the world a better place. That's the answer, I think. And you got to do that through everything you do. And you got to keep a positive attitude about it, and it's really difficult to do that. But the main one is to just think relatively how lucky we are. There are plenty of people in this world where they can't even have these kinds of discussions. So we should use the privilege that we have to make the world a better place. And any secret agents that are here, this is your opportunity to make the world a better place. Just give me any documents you want. Come talk to me. I'll buy you a drink. Or someone else will buy you a drink. Leave it in an envelope by the bar. That's like, whatever you got. Let's make the world a better place together.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen. Die Tarotkarte der Eremit. Was bedeutet sie in der aufrechten und umgekehrten Position? Auf der Karte ist ein umhüllter Mann abgebildet, der einsam in einer kargen Gegend wandert. In der aufrechten Position steht der Eremit für eine Sinnsuche. Zugleich ermuntert er dich, einen erfahrenen Lehrer für deinen spirituellen Weg aufzusuchen. Ein zeitweiser Rückzug in die Einsamkeit kann dir zudem zu neuen Erkenntnissen verhelfen. In der umgekehrten Position offenbart der Eremit, dass du ziellos im Leben umherirrst. Ebenso lässt sich bei dir eine Tendenz zur Isolation und Abschottung von der Außenwelt erkennen. Der umgekehrte Eremit steht für eine tiefsitzende Enttäuschung, die dich plagt. 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 Enttäuschung, die dich Täuschung, die dich plagt. Täuschung, die dich plagt. Täuschung, die dich plagt.
So the secret agent can come now to the bar, ask for the free drink. Ask for the free drink.
Ich bin Konrad Bayer. 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 Ich bin Konrad Bayer.
Mora kira kechunyande. Mora kira kechunyande. Mora kira kechunyande.
Und natürlich wollten wir einen der größten Hermits, größten überhaupt lebenden Hermits zu uns in die Höhle, in den Cave Space One einladen. Natürlich wollten wir das, Julian Assange. Aber Julian Assange kann nicht nur zu uns kommen, nicht zu uns kommen, da er in Belmarsh in London im Hochsicherheitstrakt inhaftiert ist. Er kann auch faktisch keine privaten Gespräche führen. Er darf nur mit seiner Frau und seinen Anwälten sprechen. Ansonsten ist er völlig isoliert. Natürlich hätten wir gerne mit diesem Isolierten hier ein Gespräch geführt. Ein direktes Gespräch von Hermit zu Hermit, vom Kunsthermit zum politischen Aktivisten Hermit. Aber wir können es nicht. Darum müssen wir jetzt schon, wenn wir über Assange reden, wenn wir mit Assange reden wollen, müssen wir auf das zurückgreifen, was es an Material gibt, bis zu seiner Inhaftierung, bis zu dem, als er aus der Botschaft in London, aus der ecuadorianischen Botschaft herausgeholt wurde und seitdem im Hochsicherheitstrakt in London in Belmarsh sitzt. Courage is contagious, sagte Ellsberg, einer der ersten Whistleblower überhaupt aus den USA. Jake Appelbaum hat es zum Motto für seine Thesis gemacht, für seine Doktorarbeit gemacht.
As a result of this interaction with the world and trying to be the best at certain things, I came to see some parts of how technology was evolving and how it might be used. By the 1990s, I and several others in the United States and Europe were involved in something called the crypto wars. So let's understand where we were. The Cold War had just finished. Many of the architectures of the Cold War were still around. Legal and political relationships were still around. One of those was the Wassenaar Agreement. And the Wassenaar Agreement was agreement essentially to blockade the Soviet Union, where all the West got together and said, we're not going to allow any interesting technology to go into Warsaw Pact countries because we don't want them to have an edge. And the FBI, National Security Agency, in response to people like me and Philip Zimmerman and others developing cryptography, engaged in a crackdown on cryptography. And there was this is a very long story, but there was a multi-part play to finally ban cryptography from everyone, starting with banning its export, then introducing new government-approved crypto systems and so on. We won this war, but in the process of this war, a lot of us started to look at where this whole system was going, and we could see that cryptography, for example, was a intensely liberating device if individuals or small groups or political parties or journalists or human rights activists had it, but the governments also used it, and states also used it to better control their own resources. And so if we leap forward now, a lot of the things that I and others predicted in the 1990s would happen, or we were concerned would happen, in fact did happen. In fact, may have even happened at a slightly faster rate than what we predicted. And so now we are at a position where the development of the internet and Silicon Valley and advanced cryptography is a threat to human civilization. And why is it equivalent to some other threats, for example, thermonuclear warfare? Well, because it's something that's happening to all of human civilization at once. In fact, to that degree, it is more significant than ICBMs and thermonuclear warfare. The other way in which it is, which even if there had been a World War III, it would have left the southern hemisphere largely intact. This is a development that's happening to even Kurdistan. So there is no organized place in any country which is not completely infiltrated by the internet. So anything that befalls the internet befalls global civilization, potentially leaving no place and no person who has influence.
Assange kann selbst nicht mehr sprechen. Er ist festgesetzt und kann selber nicht mehr sprechen. Darum versuchen wir heute für ihn weiterzusprechen hier im Cave Space One und ein paar seiner Gedanken für ihn zu übernehmen. Vielleicht werden wir dann auch hier merken, dass Courage contagious ist.
Well, first of all, you know, I have been concerned about these issues since my 20s, but I have become more concerned now. And so you must take some self-reflection and go, well, hang on, all right, I'm in a very unusual situation as well, being detained without charge for 5 years and having criminal cases in a number of, well, in 5 different countries, which might tend towards some sort of pessimism about where the world is going. Caveman. So I've done my best to try and abstract myself from my present situation. But, you know, you go back 110 years and you have people complaining about the railways. How the railways and the interconnectivity created by railways and telegraph is destroying local communities. Similarly, when telephone was introduced and when TV was introduced and obviously the printing press, many people complaining about these developments in technology. So you have to ask yourself the question, it is simply that it's something that's new. And those people that are not very young have developed certain practices and expectations and are confronted by the changes, but the changes themselves may not necessarily be bad. So is it, you know, old people are tend towards neuroluditism? So we have to first understand that we're not going down that path. And what's happening now is something that is different. Similarly, people in the humanities tend to oppose. People in technology are doing well, just through natural.
Wir geben den Stab weiter, den Lesestab. Wir haben dazu auch eine Lampe. Oh, hier reichte vielleicht das. Maybe this light is okay also. Yeah? Yes, right, from here. Yeah?
So, social and economic competition. Well, those guys are masters of that. Someone in the humanities is not, or someone in politics is not. Therefore, we want to keep these guys down because they're getting too much power. Is that what is going on with some of the critic of technology? Yes, a little bit, but this is it is but this is something that is different to what has happened before with the introduction of new technologies, the speed, the overwhelming dominance in terms of interaction of individual people, the number of countries swept up in it, and the centralization that a particular kind of technology is, that the very technology that we use to organize and to think through problems. So this is not like previous technologies change, where the people were objected to change have complained. This is something that's different. So the left critique of technology seems to have developed after maybe by the 70s. And that's the interesting thing, because communism was all about, well, in terms of perception, industrialization and bringing the fruits of technology to the population as a whole. Even in Chile in the 70s, the 1970s, you have the cybernetics program. But at some stage between 1970s and today, the left decided that technology was something that was owned by the other side, intellectually owned by the other side, and abandoned it, and abandoned talking about it. And as a result, the other side has developed a very sophisticated narrative about where the world is going in terms of technology.
It's a forward-looking, unstoppable narrative that is coupled to definitions of progress. Increase society and power for individuals that young people naturally aspire to, because young people don't have power, all people do. And young people seek power by understanding new things that old people do not. And now, why I say it's so important for the left to understand this is the left's rhetoric will just not be embraced by young people unless it has a description of what the world is to be, other than income distributions and justice in the courts. It has to have a description about, well, where the world is headed in terms of technological progress. Now, Silicon Valley, in its rejection of an ideology, weird. And a description that suits its interests is now totally dominant. So I can't just might think, for example, that in China or India, where there's also technological sectors and a desire to do some of the things that Silicon Valley is doing, and at least in China to make it Chinese, that there is perhaps a different that word description of where this is going compared to Silicon Valley. It's not the same people in China that are creating Chinese search engines, creating Chinese mail systems, etc. They're pushing forward the exact same description about how you do this kind of thing and what the benefits are to people.
Wir geben den Stab weiter.
They're adopting the modern models of Silicon Valley. And it's not even that the Silicon Valley narrative is so persuasive in affecting the brains of young people in China and in India, let alone in the West. It is that the narrative is false. It is false narrative about how Silicon Valley came to be and what it aspires to. There is a really important video that everyone should look at. Search for the secret history of Silicon Valley. and it's produced by. There's been several versions of it by a venture capital professor at Stanford, so he's coming from things from a fairly conservative business perspective, but he wanted to understand what was the real history. But the real history is massive. Massive state investment in Silicon Valley as a result of a missile race immediately post-World War II and the interception rates to fund university programs to research technology, aggressively fund them, have them transfer the technology into startup companies which are funded by the US government with a 300% increase in venture capital, funding and guaranteed customer supply, namely the military and intelligence services agencies. That has happened for years and years until maybe the 1990s, while the consumer sector perhaps became bigger than the government sector. But as there were smaller companies, such as Google, became big, although DAPRA, the Defense Advanced Research Product Agency, was staying Google in the beginning part of the initial seed funding as they became bigger. Despite that, the majority of the income has to do with grabbing the users and selling them to advertisers. As large organizations that invited to sit down at the seats of power and use classical instruments of US international. The policy and influence, like the State Department to get their way in the world. So Google now spends more money lobbying the US government than any other company. More than the Lockheed Martin, more than Richter, more than General Electric. There has effectively a State Department inside of Google Ideas, which is headed up by Gerald Corn, who is Hillary Clinton's former tech advisor, and Rice's former tech advisor. Eric Schmidt is deeply in bed with Hillary Clinton, but has even started a company to help Hillary win the election. This is the chairman of Google. So these large companies, regardless of how they started, once they become large enough, they start interfacing the classical power structures of the United States and then a little bit with the rest of the West, and then push the false narrative that they have constructed into the rest of the world, where it has taken up by the rest of the world. And it used to prevent technological innovation in other countries, because in other countries starts to come 3-to-1 venture capital funding, say for example in Brazil, Ecuador, and the US government goes, well, how can you do that? You are now creating subsidies, you are biasing the development of the economy.
Wir geben den Stab weiter. Julian Assange kann nicht sprechen, wir sprechen für ihn.
Few periods in my life have passed so quickly. I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. It is 6 months now, and I can tell you truthfully, few periods in my life have passed so quickly. I am in excellent physical and emotional health. I think the combination of age and the greater coming together is responsible for the passing time. In my life have passed so quickly. I am in excellent physical and emotional health. I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. It is 6 months now, and I can tell you truthfully, few periods in my life have passed so quickly. I am in excellent physical and emotional health. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, but I feel secure and ready. I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. It is 6 months now, and I can tell you truthfully, few periods in my life have passed so quickly. I am in physical and emotional health. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, but I feel secure and ready as lovers will contrast their emotions in time. I am in excellent physical and emotional health. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, but I feel secure and ready as lovers will contrast their emotions in times of crisis. So, am I dealing with my environment? I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. It is 6 months now, and I can tell you truthfully, few periods in my life I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. It is 6 months now, and I can tell you truthfully, few periods in my life have passed so quickly. In the indifferent brutality, the incessant noise, the experimental chemistry of food, the ravings of lost hysterical men, I can act with clarity. In the indifferent brutality, the incessant noise, the experimental chemistry of food, the ravings of lost hysterical men, I can act with clarity. And weaning I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. It's 6 months now, and I can tell you, truthfully, few periods in my life have passed so quickly. I am in excellent physical and emotional health. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, and I feel secure and ready as lovers in my life. In times of crisis, so am I dealing with my environment in the indifferent brutality, incessant noise, the experimental chemistry of food, the ravings of lost hysterical men. I can act with clarity and meaning. I am deliberate. Except as a test of the reaction of others. It is 6 months now, and I can tell you, truthfully, few periods in my life have passed so quickly. I am in excellent physical and emotional health. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, but I feel secure and ready as lovers will contrast their emotions in times of crisis. So am I dealing with my environment in the indifferent brutality, the incessant noise, the experimental chemistry of food, the ravings of lost hysterical men. I can act with clarity and meaning. I am deliberate, sometimes even calculating, seldom employing histrionics, except as a test of the reactions of others. I read much, exercise, talk to guards and inmates, feeling for the inevitable direction of my life. I am in excellent physical and emotional health. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, but I feel secure and ready as lovers will contrast their emotions in times of crisis. So am I dealing with my environment? I am in excellent physical and emotional health. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, but I feel secure and ready as lovers will contrast their emotions in times of crisis. So am I dealing with my environment, the indifferent brutality, the incessant noise, the experimental chemistry of food, the ravings of lost hysterical men? I can act with clarity and meaning. I am deliberate, sometimes even calculating, seldom employing histrionics, except as a test of the reactions of others. I read much, exercise, talk to guards and inmates, feeling for the inevitable direction of my life. There are doubtless subtle surprises ahead, but I feel secure and ready as lovers will contrast their emotions in times of crisis. So am I dealing with my environment in the indifferent brutality, the incessant noise, the experimental chemistry of food, the ravings of lost hysterical men? I can act with clarity and meaning. I am deliberate, sometimes even calculating, seldom employing histrionics, except as a test of the reactions of others. I read much, exercise, talk to guards and inmates, feeling for the inevitable direction of my life. As lovers will contrast their emotions in times of crisis, so am I dealing with my environment in the indifferent brutality, the incessant noise, the experimental chemistry of food, the raving of lost hysterical men. I can act with clarity and meaning. I am deliberate, sometimes even calculating, seldom employing histrionics, except as a test of the reaction of subtle in the indifferent brutality, the incessant noise, experimental chemistry of food, the ravings of lost hysterical men. I can act with clarity and meaning. I am deliberate, sometimes even calculating, seldom employing histrionics. I read much, exercise, talk to guards and inmates, feeling for the inevitable direction of my life. I am deliberate, sometimes calculating, seldom employing histrionics, except as a test of the reactions of others. I read much, exercise, talk to guards and inmates, feeling for the inevitable direction of my life. I read much, exercise, talk to guards and inmates, feeling for the inevitable direction of my life.
I don't know if that's even worse of a depressing outcome than what you expected, but basically I think we're fucked and we're all going to die, and probably in a climate collapse. And the surveillance will be used to ensure that the rich die last. So, you know, enjoy it while it lasts.